Hello and welcome. Today's video, you will have seen the title, is the start of the second Begin to Knit or Learn to Knit series. And if you've seen my original Learn to Knit, how to knit a scarf in the round, this is a follow-on from this, and the second item that I recommend as a beginner that you knit will expand on the skills that you've learnt by doing the scarf. So in the scarf you learnt to cast on, you learnt to knit in the round, you learnt to about beginning of round, you learnt the knit, and you learnt the knit stitch. In this pattern, which is the Musselburgh hat by Ysolda Teague, it is essentially knit in a very similar way to what you will have done with the scarf, but instead of a tube we are going to close both ends of that tube, and that means that the start to this is a little bit tricky, but once you get going and you mastered a couple of new stitches, which is first of all, to get started, is just increases, then I'm sure that you will find that it is just as enjoyable as knitting the scarf in the round, the tube scarf, and this just adds increases and decreases, a different cast on method, and means that you've learnt to knit a new item, and also you will then be learning the skills required for when you come to knit a sweater in the round, which is what I'm going to do next in this series. So today's pattern, it is a beanie hat pattern. It's a very popular pattern because you can knit it at a lot of different gauges, which is why I also think that it is going to be good as a beginner, because you will learn how to check your gauge in your knitting, and gauge is really important for getting the right final the final garment in the size that you intend it to be. So if you pick size 3 for example in the pattern, if your gauge is correct as stated in the pattern, and then your garment at the end should be a size 3 and will match the information about the size on the pattern. And this is really important when you're going forward and wanting to knit sweaters. So the pattern is a paid for pattern, so I'm not going to be talking about numbers in the pattern. I'm just talking you through the techniques that you will be required to knit this pattern. You will need to go onto Ravelry and purchase the pattern. I don't think it's very expensive. It's worth every penny in my opinion. I've already knit 3 or 4 of these, if not more, and it's a fantastic pattern. The cast on method that I'm going to show you for this pattern is one that is done by Knitty Natty, and that's the one that I follow, and I just follow it step by step, and each time once I'm cast on I'm away and I'm knitting the hat, and it's her method I find works very well for me. If you prefer to find and look up a different tutorial, that's entirely up to you, or just to follow what is stated in the pattern. I've just always done this because I know she's knit a lot of hats and her instructions are very simple. Essentially the cast on is a cast on that you can tighten, and that just means that the hole at the end of the hat can be closed. So you're making, like I say, the tube that you close at each end. Now, I'll talk through what you need. Now, you can knit this hat in either a double knitting yarn or in a fingering weight yarn. I will be using a fingering weight yarn. I've done most of mine in a fingering weight. I have managed successfully to knit several of these hats with 100 grams of fingering weight yarn. And the yarn that I'm going to be using is this lovely one from Blue Fern Yarns. It's one that I got as my Christmas Day skein in one of my advents. And this is just wound up into a cake so that I can knit from it. If you're unsure about what yarn cakes are, yarn skeins are, yarn balls are, I do have a little bit of a chat about that in my earlier Learn to Knit videos. So yeah, I've got 100 grams of a fingering weight yarn, and that's what I'm going to be using. Regardless of the yarn that you get, fingering or DK, the cast on will be, the cast on is exactly the same for all of them. Because I'm using a fingering weight yarn, I'm going to be using a 3mm needle, and with a DK, generally you should be using about a 4mm. The needle size is not necessarily important for this project, but you do need a needle size that will give you a fabric that you like. And the best way to do this often is to look on the band that is on your yarn, and that will tell you in there the recommended needle size for your fabric. At this stage, if you've only knit the scarf tube, you probably won't know if you're a tight or loose knitter. But for this practice and doing this hat, it isn't necessarily important. It's just good to get a needle that is going to create a nice fabric for you that you like from your yarn. So I've got a 3mm needle. I've got a long needle so that I can do a magic loop. Now, we didn't discuss magic loop in the scarf tutorial because we knit that on a small circular needle, a 16-inch. For this hat, the start of it will be very small and then we'll be gradually getting bigger. So because of that, you do need to be able to do my preferred method of knitting small circumferences for this type of thing is magic loop. And essentially what we will do is we will have stitches on, half the stitches on one needle, half on the other, and then once it gets to a circumference that we are comfortable knitting just round and round, I normally then swap onto a 16-inch needle. So you will need this, and you'll also need a 16-inch if you want to swap, but the whole garment can be knit in magic loop. You will also need a beginning of round marker. Now, this is not necessarily essential at the very start, but I will be showing you a few tips that will help you going forward for magic loop when you're a beginner and you're not 100% sure on beginning of round and things like that. Now, you can just use a light bulb stitch marker or a more fancy one, but if you use a light bulb stitch marker, what is quite handy with this project, because you're knitting in the round, you can actually attach this to the fabric at the side, which is the beginning of round, and then you know where you're up to, especially with checking if you're on a knit row or you're on an increase row. And then you need some of these stitch markers, and I don't know if you'll be able to see that because it's very, very tiny. It's just literally a little circle that I'll put it on the needle, and then you'll probably be able to see it a lot better. So you put that on your needle between different stitches to mark the places where you want to do your increases. Now, when you start knitting this hat, you do only need two stitch markers of them. But if you decide to knit it fully in the round, and the way that I do it to make it easier is I end up using 4 stitch markers. So just make you aware of that at this point. And I think that's everything you need. So you need to buy the pattern, you need, and download it from Ravelry and either do that online or print off. You also need your yarn and the needles that you're going to be using. You can have a larger circular needle, the 80 centimetre for doing magic loop, which is how you start, and you can knit the whole thing on that, or you can decide to change at a certain point to the 16-inch circular, and I'll be doing that because I find it flows better. And if you have done the scarf and you've got a fingering weight to do the hat, you will have a needle that is suitable when you get to that point. So you'll only have to buy one new needle. And yeah, and then you just need your beginning of round marker, which obviously if you swap over to if you swap over to knitting in the round, you will need that for sure. And I think that's everything. That's the introduction. So this is part 1. And I hope you join along in knitting this Musselburgh hat. And in the next video, I will show you how to do the cast on and also link Knitty Natty's tutorial for doing that. Any questions, pop them down in the comments. I'm always happy to help new knitters along. And there is also a link to my Discord group if you would like to chat about all things knitting. See you in the next one. Bye.